Do you ever wonder why comic hosting platforms like Webtoons don't promote your story? Well, it turns out promoting stories based on merit is actually bad for business. Why? Well, through my research, I've discovered the same fatal flaw in all platforms that stops them from being fair to creators and successful at the same time. But also, a very real, legitimate solution you can use right now to fix that. If you want to find out more, continue watching. So, what's the flaw? The flaw is that these story hosting platforms are horribly incapable of spreading stories to users at scale. Let's take the top 2 comic hosting platforms out there as an example, Webtoons and Tapas. If you wanted to find a new story, what would you do? You would go to the homepage, or maybe a category page, to see a selection of stories. Then you choose from that selection based off a feature image, a title, sometimes a category or a like count, and that's about it. Do you see the issue here? There's not exactly a lot of information for you to make an informed decision. Honestly, normally I just choose the one with the prettiest picture and hope I didn't just waste my time. The best detail they give to help me determine if this story is what I'm looking for is with categories. But even this is limited. Take Tapas for example. With nearly 90,000 comics, they have roughly 6,000 per category. How is any person reasonably meant to find something in that? And the thing is, going forward, this is only going to get much worse. For a moment, I'm going to put aside the morals of this topic and just talk about the impacts. For better or worse, the introduction of AI is set to dramatically accelerate the creation of new stories. Don't get me wrong, they're not going to do it all on their own, but they can assist very real artists. One man was able to write 100 books in less than a year with ChatGPT and Midjourney alone. And whilst I don't think everyone will create 100 times more art, I do think it is reasonable to believe that artists could create art in half or a third of the time compared to just a few years ago, because of AI. So while we may see 6,000 comics per category on Tapas now, that may very easily become 10, 15, or even 20,000 in a few years' time. This is all to say that more so now than ever before, we need a hosting model that spreads stories to users effectively at scale. And right now, we don't have one. Okay, let's take a short breather and recap. There is an overwhelming number of stories to choose from. Current platforms provide little information to help users find and distinguish between those stories. AI will intensify the already terrible situation. So, what's the impact of all these issues? Well, with so many stories per category and little information to distinguish between them, only a select few stories will feature on the front page. To go back to our Tapas example again, I can only see 10 to 15 stories on my screen at a time. Which means after doing everything you possibly could to filter stories, you would still end up seeing just the top 0.25% of stories. From a reader point of view, this is quite frustrating to try and sort through. But the biggest issue is that it basically locks out any story not already popular from getting seen. Like 0.63% of people click on the second page of Google, and you expect me to believe you'll promote my niche story to the front page over 6,000 others? Please. To make matters worse, this encourages readers to read the stories that are already popular, making it even more challenging for newer or niche stories to get promoted. This creates an unfair and difficult pathway to success for smaller stories, favoring those that started earlier. There's a catch-22 at the heart of the issue. That being, if platforms start promoting lesser-known stories and genres, They inherently promote stories that make less money, have less resources to make higher quality content, engage with users less, which will ultimately make the platform less money. Now, don't get me wrong, promoting these stories can be profitable. In fact, it's a vital long-term strategy to find your next big money-making hit. But taken as a whole, because of a lack of resources and/or a niche focus, these stories are less likely to be engaging to a mainstream audience. So to make it profitable, you've got to be really good at targeting these stories to readers that'll enjoy them. Get this wrong and the platform suffers. Whether it's with less users, less resourced stories to promote its services, or less money to develop the platform, make no mistake, it will suffer. Suffer enough, and someone else will come in and dominate the market instead. It may sound bad, but when you're bad at sharing stories, giving everybody fair and equal treatment costs. That said, not being fair also costs. Creators that aren't at the top get really frustrated and discouraged, working less or just quitting altogether. So for these platforms, it becomes a bit of a balancing act. They want to be fair enough to not dissatisfy creators to the point where they leave, but they also want to maximize their money-making stories to be the biggest platform out there. And they can't do both at the same time, all because they're bad at sharing stories. With all this in mind, a solution must then give readers plenty of information to find stories, promote stories of value, promote new stories, do this at scale, be fair without sacrificing success. Let's run through a few attempts to try and solve this. Why don't platforms add more categories? Wouldn't you want to give readers as much information as possible? Basically add as many categories as you can possibly think of? Well, actually, it turns out that it makes no difference. Why? Because they sort by popularity. This means that if they give a story multiple tags, the same story will appear at the top of multiple categories, really limiting the usefulness of having more categories in the first place. Okay, so to combat this, platforms will limit the number of categories each story can be assigned to, usually about 1 or 2. So what happens when you add more categories with this condition in place? Well, one of two things. Either niche categories would have barely any stories in them, or stories would be wildly labeled around very minor characteristics of the story. Either way, again, the usefulness of adding more categories is limited. One interesting solution by Tapas is to just combine the categories into one new category and tag stories of both in it. And I don't know, this gets like a participation award, I guess. Like, it's kind of better, but the issue is any story in a combined category does not appear in the individual categories, which doesn't scale well. Can you imagine having to go to the action, comedy, fantasy, drama, mystery category to see a specific story because it doesn't appear in any of the other categories or category combinations? That would be insane. Anyway, if you wanted to understand why platforms kind of suck with genres, now you know. In my opinion, the best solution these platforms have is to use some sort of algorithm to try and determine what a reader will engage with. And whilst this is like better than just straight up ordering stories based on popularity, unfortunately it will simply never be a great solution. To explain why, let's look at YouTube, who also uses an algorithm pretty effectively to sort literally billions of videos for users. The key difference, however, between YouTube or Facebook or TikTok and comic hosting sites is data. Algorithms get better with data. YouTube has 2.5 billion monthly active users, 5 billion videos watched per day, 46.2 minutes per user per day in the US. In comparison, the largest comic hosting platform out there has 7% of the monthly user base. More than that though, if a user commits 46.2 minutes to a platform, how many videos do they watch? Something like 2 to 20? That's 2 to 20 points of data per user per day for an algorithm to learn from. Compare this though to the time commitment for a story. Multiple chapters, sometimes hundreds per story, each of which takes 5 to 10 minutes to read. And you've got yourself a lot less points of data. To make the problem worse though, stories update throughout the month and year, pulling users back to the same story multiple times. Which, unlike YouTube channels that also upload new content frequently, this doesn't add to the algorithm. Why? If you think of YouTube channels as stories, then YouTube videos are the equivalent to chapters. So while YouTube's algorithm recommends videos, comic hosting sites recommend the equivalent of channels. All of this is to say, a user can spend weeks, months, years reading one story on a platform, feeding the algorithm exactly once in all that time. So, if you want to understand the problem with attempting to use algorithms to sort and recommend stories to people, just imagine how effective YouTube's algorithm would be with 7% of the user base, and with each user watching 2 to 20 videos a month or year instead of per day. The solution presented by artists is to self-market. Create a social media presence and spend your time promoting your series. This approach is one of the only ways creators can be in control of their success. But, unfortunately, is born more out of necessity due to the platform's failings than truly being the best approach to the problem. The issue is, it aligns the success of a comic with the ability of an artist to promote or network. Unfortunately, there is little connection between an artist's ability to promote a story and the quality of the story itself. Creating art and networking are simply not the same skill set. But what's worse is that every minute an artist spends networking is a minute less that they can spend doing and improving what they're actually good at, creating art. As a platform, you want your artists to spend as much time as possible improving and working on their craft. So the platform's problems directly result in lower quality and quantity of work. Not to mention the fact that artists may be forced to do something they don't particularly enjoy, just to survive. Let's add to our list then. A proper solution must also allow stories to be in many categories, not rely on algorithms, not divert artists' attention away from their creations. Indulge me for a moment as I pitch what a potential solution could look like on one of these platforms. Is it perfect? Probably not. But does it tick all the boxes? Hell yeah. So what is it? I call it infinite tagging. Imagine a pretty standard system where stories have tags and users can sort and filter stories by those tags. Now imagine the possibilities if you could attach as many tags as you like to a story. And when a tag doesn't already exist, you could simply create a new tag for you and everyone else to use. As stories aren't limited in tags, and tags aren't limited to a list of categories that the platform's choosing, readers can receive as much information as humanly possible to find stories. In such a system, there may be hundreds of categories to choose from, significantly reducing the number of comics per tag. Just to emphasize how impactful this could be, because these tags are user-generated, they don't have to just be genres. They can be literally anything a user thinks can help classify a story. From the type of art style used, the stage of production, the location the story takes place in, a scenario within the story, to even a quality or feeling emanating from the work itself. In terms of giving readers information to figure out if this is a story they like, it can hardly get any better than this. Okay, so we've allowed stories to be in many categories, given readers the maximum amount of information to find stories, and all without relying on a system that uses obscure algorithms or asks artists to market stories themselves. But doesn't this just lead to the same issue as before, where popular stories always appear at the top of categories? Well, there's one more piece to the puzzle that turns this from an interesting idea to a game changer. Imagine if this system, infinite tagging, allows users to vote on these tags based on what tags they believe is the most relevant to the story. Meaning that instead of stories being sorted by popularity, they're sorted by relevancy to a tag, where the most relevant stories appear at the top. So for example, when you sort by action, instead of getting the most popular stories that happen to feature the action tag, you get action stories, sorted by those with the most action to the least action. So no matter how many tags there are, no matter how many tags you attach to a story, the story can only appear at the top of so many categories. Even if we include popularity in the sorting to ensure that money-making stories still get attention, there are still only so many categories a story can be at the top of, fixing the issue completely and giving us a solution that scales no matter how many stories or tags there are. But let's go a step further. What if infinite tagging also allowed the sorting and filtering of any combination of tags? Then, if you wanted to see only the stories that contained action and comedy, sorted by those stories that were the most relevant to both action and comedy, you can. Not to nerd out too much here, but to emphasize just how crazy this is, with just 40 tags in the system, there are already over 1 trillion possible combinations for users to sort and filter by. And because infinite tagging includes relevancy in the sorting, not just popularity, each of these combinations would showcase a different set of stories at the top of the page. So, searching for stories readers are actually interested in could not be any easier, giving smaller, newer, niche stories a chance to be discovered by those interested readers without compromising the promotion of bigger stories. Ultimately, allowing infinite tagging to be fair for smaller stories without costing the platform. To summarize, infinite tagging gives readers plenty of information to find stories, promotes stories of value, promotes new stories, does this at scale, is fair without sacrificing success, allows stories to be in many categories, doesn't rely on algorithms, and doesn't divert artists' attention away from their creations. And as a result, I believe infinite tagging has the potential to really change the industry for the better. Look, I'd be lying to you if I said that simply sharing this video or idea would change things. The truth is, as great as I think infinite tagging is, asking you to just promote the idea in the hope that Webtoons, Tapas, or any other large platform for that matter would adopt it is naive at best. I've seen time and time again big companies actively ignore their users, even when their users have valid arguments that would make the company better off. From my experience, most companies don't change unless it hits their bottom line enough. They have to be dragged, kicking and screaming from the comfort of profitable inactivity. And even then, some will just never adapt fast enough to avoid bankruptcy. So, honestly, I don't have much faith that these platforms will change to a system even vaguely resembling infinite tagging, even if we tried our best to convince them. Which is why I created Atelier Online. I implemented infinite tagging in its entirety on a site myself. The idea being that this will showcase how it can be done to other platforms, hurt the platforms enough to adopt it themselves, or become the dominant platform out there. Regardless, a better model to spread stories gets implemented. So, what can you do to change the industry? Go check out Atelier Online. I pasted the link in the description. Play around with it, let me know your thoughts. If you like it, share it, or share this video. Hell, if you really love it, keep the lights on with a donation. If you think I'm wrong or miss something with infinite tagging, leave a comment below, and I'll either respond or make another video going into more detail. On that topic, infinite tagging and better story distribution is just one of many things I like to see changed in the industry. And my lack of faith in big corporations kinda holds true for all of these changes. As a result, I've added them all to Atelier Online for the same reasons as infinite tagging, which, just between you and me, isn't even my favorite feature on the site. But just like this topic, I plan to create a video going into detail on all of these issues and how we've approached solving each one. So if you like this video and any of the issues here intrigues you, stay tuned, or go try it out yourself right now. Atelier Online has already implemented the solution for most of these issues. All I'll be doing in those future videos is explaining in detail how. And look, if you try it out and you don't like Atelier Online, don't believe in it, by all means, go back to wherever you post your stories. I created Atelier Online because I believe the landscape is slated against creators. And that truthfully, goodwill or good intentions is not enough to fix that. To really fix it, you need to reshape the landscape. Which is exactly what we plan to do.